The Mind Conspirators, Saturday, September 4, 2010, by Nelson Hultberg. More and more Americans today are coming to understand the terrible truth about our federal government, that it seeks to dominate us as citizens, to mold us into a society of dutiful Stepford wives totally beholden to the wishes of elite politicians, bureaucrats and bankers. Those who study history, independent of the public school system, understand that this state aggrandizement process has been underway for the past 100 years in America in one form or another, and that it is taking place because too many of our citizens sanction such dictatorial usurpation and actually work diligently for its implementation. This process has resulted in the lion's share of our earnings being annually confiscated by these governmental elites and then redistributed to despicable projects of waste and war to further their dream of world collectivism. It has led to the shocking debasement of our currency and an endless escalation in the cost of staying alive. It has brought about the degeneration of our economy from a robust engine of industry and personal self-reliance to an effete conglomeration of bloated consumers subsisting on financial gimmickry and debt addiction. As a result, America, once a proud land of muscular factories and productive people, has become a stuporous society of shopping malls and welfare crybabies. Why this process is taking place is one of the most disheartening questions in all of history. What follows is an attempt to show why and how it is unfolding. There are other reasons as to why and how than the ones given here. Tyranny's evolution is always a complex process with many forces coalescing to bring about freedom's demise. This essay, however, is a look into the two most important of those forces, ideas and money. A very popular and frightening science fiction movie in 1956, called Invasion of the Body Snatchers, is an apt metaphor for what is taking place in our country. In the movie starring Dana Winter and Kevin McCarthy, a network of aliens is slowly and secretly taking over the bodies of the citizens of a small town by use of mysterious cadaver-like pods that are left in their backyards and basements. Once transformed into an alien, each citizen then tries to recruit the rest of his family and friends. It's absolutely chilling in its impact, one of the great science fiction movies ever. Today's collectivists, working so assiduously to transform America, are like the aliens in that movie. They permeate our entire society and are after not our bodies, but the enslavement of our minds and souls. Ideological fallacies and moral inversions are the mysterious pods that these aliens leave in the cerebral backyards of our lives. They are aliens because they wish to destroy our system of natural liberty and limited government. And even though most of them believe what they are doing is right, they are far from innocent, for they have chosen to blank out on the horrendous ramifications of what they are doing. Teaching a false ideal, it begins in the school system. All modern authoritarian political movements have required recruitment of a disciplined, intellectual vanguard to proselytize the masses into accepting the authoritarian rule. This vanguard is recruited from the best and brightest minds of the nation involved. History shows how leading intellects of Europe used this strategy starting in the 1880s and 1890s to move Germany, Russia, and Italy into authoritarian political systems by the 1917 to 1930 period. What history also shows is that the same thing has been going on in America for many decades, only on a more subtle level. The problem is that our media and our scholars lose their objectivity when analyzing their own political system and the ideas used to promote it. Thus, history's lesson is ignored in order to further the recruitment of the American intelligentsia into promotion of collectivism. Instead of being objective forums for the transmission of the values of civilization to the young, our colleges and universities have now become fervent breeding grounds for this statist recruitment process, in which the better students get swept up in the false ideal of collectivism. These better students then proceed out into the world to positions of intellectual, political and economic leadership, to proselytize the masses into this alleged ideal, just as church missionaries used to go out into the world to spread the gospel. The difference being that the missionaries were spreading good, while today's collectivists are pushing fallacies. Such a vision very subtly conveys the notion that mankind is capable of achieving an egalitarian world where there will be no poverty, no disparity of wealth, no prejudice, no ignorance, no wars, in short a heaven on earth. The requisites for bringing about such a world are to eradicate the dangerous workings of the free market through centralization of government power in Washington, and then eventually move to some form of world governing body. This is necessary because it is allegedly capitalism and man's drive for profits that are responsible for the strife, wars and poverty from which the world suffers. Western civilization, having been built upon capitalism and profit, must be raised and replaced with a new civilization that will usher in this heaven on earth. It is a powerful futuristic vision that is subtly instilled into callow minds who lack the necessary sophistication to resist. Being young and prone to idealism, they perceive political centralization and a one-world government to be an ideal, just as the students in Marx's day mistook his dictatorship of the proletariat as some sort of ideal. Thousands of highly intelligent students spring forth from this brainwash every year to enter the world and spread their newly learned convictions that capitalism and Western civilization are the roots of all evil. These best and brightest of our youth advance over the years into prominent careers as teachers, journalists, publishers, movie directors, ministers, politicians, bankers, and businessmen, all the time working for and promoting the collectivization of our society. Yet they don't see themselves as working for anything dictatorial. They think the political centralization and Keynesian economics taught to them by their mentors will cure the evils and inequities of the world. When they push for more centralized government, more taxes, more regulations, and more liquidity injections from the Fed, they are working for what they think will be a more benign civilization. They think they are working for an ideal. As the great philosophers tell us, it is ideals that are the primary movers of men throughout history. Our tragedy is that we are educating one generation after another with false ideals, and the evidence that would expose the falsity of those ideals is not allowed a respectable place in our public schools due to those schools controlled by government bureaucracies and the statist viewpoint. The New World Order, one of the most influential institutions resulting from this indoctrination process, is what is called the Trilateral Commission. This is an international group of about 300 elite intellectuals, statesmen, bankers, and businessmen founded in 1973 by billionaire banker David Rockefeller as a spin-off from the older Council on Foreign Relations (CFR). The Council on Foreign Relations is like the Trilateral Commission, only larger. It is composed of about 4,000 prominent leaders in business, government, and education, etc. It was formed in the 1920s by a group of progressive intellectuals of Woodrow Wilson's era led by the openly acknowledged socialist, Edward Mandell House, who was Wilson's chief advisor. Its official purpose was to coordinate America's foreign policy with other nations to create a more peaceful and orderly world. The group today claims vague educational goals and the fomenting of more international cooperation as its purpose, but numerous public statements from its leaders indicate that its policies are clearly directed toward transforming U.S. sovereignty and national independence into some form of world government. It has, since the days of its inception, been patiently working for this goal, and its spin-off group, the Trilateral Commission, is doing likewise. In his book, With No Apologies, the late U.S. Senator Barry Goldwater tells us that while David Rockefeller publicly launched the Trilateral Commission, the brains behind its formation was CFR member Zbigniew Brzezinski, whose 1970 book Between Two Ages set the tone for what is now referred to as a New World Order, in which the major nations of the world, the U.S., Europe, Japan, etc., link together to plan and direct the fortunes of the rest of the world. In short, Brzezinski condemns national sovereignty as outdated and unworkable, saying that we need to rewrite the American Constitution, and eliminate our system of federalism in favor of a more centralized government in Washington and eventually subordination to a world government. Here we have a profound demonstration of how ideas shape the unfolding of history. The Trilateral Commission and its parent, the Council on Foreign Relations, are the end results of many decades of ideological corruption in our colleges and universities beginning as far back as the late 19th century. The men of zeal who are inducted into the Trilateral Commission have been indoctrinated with false philosophical, political and economic theories that declare limited government and laissez-faire capitalism to be chaotic, unworkable and morally wrong. These theories have their origin in the works of powerful collectivist thinkers such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Auguste Comte, Karl Marx, and John Maynard Keynes. The overwhelming majority of academics throughout the West have bought into these theories and have taught the trilateral members in their youth this anti-individualistic conception of politics and economics. Is it any wonder then that the trilateral members, advancing in their careers and armed with the power of such views, are driven to try and move humanity away from the destructive evils of capitalism and limited government by centralizing them under one rule? This is the nature of intellectuals. Most of them will always attempt to further the cause of what they think to be politically and morally right. Of course, it doesn't hurt the trilateral members' motivation in all this that they see themselves as part of the leadership elite that is to organize, advise and run this future one-world government. Power has consumed men throughout history, and it is no different today. Its lure makes well-meaning men zealous and arrogant. It makes them believe that the gargantua of government can be controlled once unchained from the bonds of the Constitution because it is in their well-meaning hands. In my view, wrote Goldwater, the Trilateral Commission represents a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the four centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual and ecclesiastical. What the trilaterals truly intend is the creation of a worldwide economic power superior to the political governments of the nation-states involved. As managers and creators of the system, they will rule the future. Former President Clinton's Deputy Secretary of State, Strobe Talbot, a trilateral member, succinctly expressed the organization's long-range goal recently in Time magazine. In the next century, he declared, nations as we know it will be obsolete, all states will recognize a single, global authority. National sovereignty wasn't such a great idea after all. Protectors of the empire in ancient Rome after the Republic had expanded into empire, there evolved a super-elite of ruthlessly skilled soldiers whose sole job was to look after the emperor and protect him at all cost. It was called the Praetorian Guard, and its responsibility was to perpetuate the rule of the reigning despot in power, to guard him against all enemies, to use whatever means necessary to extend his power. Goldwater likened the CFR and Trilateral Commission to a new Praetorian Guard for our age. The job of these highly influential academics, politicians, bankers, and businessmen is to ensure the perpetuation of America's centralized state and pave the path for its merging into a world state by any means. To accomplish this purpose, he writes, they mobilize the money power of the Wall Street bankers, the intellectual influence of the academic community, and the media controllers represented in the membership of the CFR and the Trilateral. A very apropos analogy indeed. The combine of the CFR and the Trilateral Commission is a modern reincarnation of Caesar's corps of elite soldiers pledged to protect despotism, not literally in terms of physical prowess as in Caesar's day, but much more sophisticatedly in terms of intellectual and financial prowess. The New World Order requires a new methodology of usurpation, and these ideological authoritarians have risen up to provide it in spades. Their methodology has worked well for the past 75 years, teach a subtle, socialistic serfdom to the more intelligent of our youth under the guise of an ideal society in which there will be no more poverty, hardship, and inequality in life if only we will construct a government that has a central bank with the ability to print money at will and is far-reaching enough to control all the political economic endeavors of man. Then sell this mess of pottage by throwing reason, history and the economic facts of reality down the memory hole. The propagandistic army of managers that Aldous Huxley warned us about in Brave New World is now upon us. Such social engineers are the statist intellectuals in our high schools, colleges and grad schools. They have a powerful control over the minds of our best and brightest youth for 12 years, and they're turning them into the most dutiful of apparatchiks for a new world collectivism. Sanity and rationality give way. This then is one of the primary reasons for the disintegration of America over the past century. Philosophical fallacies and socialist falsifications of economics and history have gained sway in the school system to poison our citizens' minds against the American concept of freedom. Such fallacies have created a grossly distorted image for the man in the street about the way the world works. Freedom is now seen as inimical to human dignity. Creative entrepreneurship is portrayed as exploitation of the poor instead of their only hope. Gold is termed a barbarous relic instead of history's proven store of value. Wealth is thought of as a part of nature and static instead of created by free men and infinite. All the values that sustain civilized life, freedom, strength of will, independence, honor, are endlessly denigrated in our schools and media. We are being conditioned to accept sloth as normalcy, servility as dignity, weakness of will as compassion, and government-conveyed privilege as justice. The world of sanity and rationality gives way to regimental nightmares of Orwellian newspeak and political correctness in order for legions of middle-class sluggards to feel good about themselves while they live out their spiritually squalid lives queuing up to the entitlement troughs of the mega-state. Pretty bubbleheads preen daily on our financial networks, playing the shill to Wall Street and Washington in order to lure unsuspecting Americans into buying insanely overvalued stocks. The great market exchanges, once prudent arenas of investment where the engine of capitalism traded value for value, have become sham casinos staggering under decades of massive Fed-created debt and lurching into oblivion on the greater fool theory. Mole-like men posture as intellectuals with a perspective that extends no further than the previous decade. We now can have freedom without risk, plenty without work, and hope without heartache. Such are the illusions of modernity's short-range mentalities. Such is the fate of those who believe knowledge is numbers and truth a remnant of primitive times, that technology is a substitute for values and security more precious than liberty. These are the irrational pretensions of our age. These monstrous absurdities, being promoted today as humane social policies, are the result of deeply flawed theoretical doctrines that have slowly permeated our academic community over the past 100 years, doctrines such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau's absolutism of the general will, which leads to majoritarian despotism, Karl Marx's labor theory of value, which leads to massive wealth redistribution, Auguste Comte's philosophy of positivism, which leads to moral relativism, Thorstein Veblen's organic concept of society, which leads to the eradication of individual rights, and John Maynard Keynes' inflationary monetary policy, which leads to the degenerate bankruptcy of our nation. Such doctrines have produced what historian, Clarence Carson, calls a collectivist curvature of the mind. It is this collectivist intellectual warp that is setting the stage for the coming dictatorship. Once the mind conspirators have worked their ideological venom into the brains of our youthful intelligentsia during their formative years, they have recruited in most instances a lifelong apparatchik for their cause. If that apparatchik is brilliant and ruthless, he will attempt to rise in government and banking circles. He will seek to join elite organizations such as the CFR and the Trilaterals. He will strive to move the country toward the collectivist ideal of a one-world government. The role of conspiracy. Many people on the political right today subscribe to the idea that not only are the elitist CFR and trilateral organizations conspiring to establish a world dictatorship, they themselves are orchestrated from behind the scenes by a smaller, more secret conspiracy of mega bankers. As this article shows, I certainly agree that collectivist elites are working to move us toward a one-world government, that these elites dominate the banking industry and bureaucracies of the nation, and that much of what they do is secret. But the banking, bureaucratic elites of modern collectivism are only part of the problem. The collectivist movement is a multifaceted phenomenon of many levels and groups all pushing for bigger and bigger government because it furthers their power, status and wealth. Obviously there are numerous conspiracies that take place within this push for bigger government. For example, the Plunge Protection Team, a crypto faction of the federal government's Working Group on Financial Markets, secretly manipulates both the Dow and the price of gold. 5. The World Trade Center attack was surely more involved than the whitewashed accounting provided by the 9/11 Commission. 6. And the North American Union is not a means to better coordinate trade between Canada, America and Mexico, it is a deceptive scheme to take us toward regional government. Conspiracies abound throughout the West to expand political control and shrink freedom. It has been this way for thousands of years. Thus it is quite logical to assume that powerful bankers and bureaucrats are conspiring to move America into a one-world government? This is the nature of men in power. Only the naive and ignorant believe otherwise. But as Ayn Rand pointed out in the 1960s, no country can be moved into a dictatorship simply by a cabal of insiders. History does not move on a singular axis. Ideology plays a paramount role. This is why Marx said, corrupt the money and the language, and capitalism can be brought down. The mega bankers and bureaucrats are not the only deceivers here. There is another group in America working to destroy our system of freedom that is equally, if not more, important. As I have endeavored to show in this essay, it is the intellectuals in our school system. They have control over the minds of our youth from grade school through graduate school, and they are instilling into them an array of fallacies that is shocking and disgusting. Thus we must not limit our diagnosis of why America is descending into a dictatorship simply to the intrigues of conspiratorial mega bankers and bureaucrats. Today's power elites are moving us into world government not just because of power lust and greed, but because of the ideological worldview that was laid down in their minds in their school years. It powerfully shapes their lives and makes them move in lockstep toward ever-increasing collectivism as they rise in their adult careers. In other words, society is moved in much the same manner as the stock market. Just as there is a sentiment, i.e., an investor psychology, that moves prices up and down in the stock and commodity markets, there is also a sentiment or zeitgeist that permeates a society in any given era and moves its citizens one way or the other, toward tyranny and corruption, or toward freedom and justice. The 20th century zeitgeist was world collectivism, and we are still mired deep in its thralls. Financial and ideological conspiracy. What has resulted from this zeitgeist is that there are two factions of collectivist elites operating in the world today: political, financial, and ideological. They both wish to bring about the end of national sovereignty and move all nations toward a one-world government to be run by endless streams of fiat money and political regimentation. The political financial elites dominate our society by means of a fascist banking cartel and the conveyance of privileges via Congress to large voting factions. The ideological elites dominate our university system by means of persuasive but false doctrines to mold the minds of our youth. Both of these elites believe that the founders' constitutional system of free enterprise is unworkable, anachronistic, evil, exploitative, racist, and environmentally devastating. Thus, in order to achieve a stable and just world, we must phase into a one-world government. The political financial elites do not overtly publicize their goal. They prefer to quietly smuggle our nation into a one-world government because they know there is too strong a tradition of freedom in America for her people to accept such a fate all at once. Thus it is implemented insidiously via deception, and therefore it is conspiratorial. After all, these elite bankers, moguls, and bureaucrats do not divulge their true intentions to the people at large, and much of their activity is secret. Good examples of the insidious and deceptive nature of their activities are found in the following three quotes by Richard N. Gardner, a member of the Kennedy and Carter administrations, and the infamous mega banker, David Rockefeller. Richard N. Gardner told the CFR in 1974, "In short, the House of World Order will have to be built from the bottom up rather than from the top down. It will look like a great booming, buzzing confusion, to use William James' famous description of reality, but an end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault." 8. David Rockefeller had this to say in 1991, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time magazine and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those years. But, the work is now much more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries." Rockefeller also had this to say in 2002, "Ideological extremists attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will. If that is the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it." 10. Our political financial elites thus have a common objective of world government, which they are very patient and discreet about. This gives them a conspiratorial incarnation. Our ideological elites are supposed to be open pursuers of the truth, constructing Socratic forums for their students, but any rational observer soon realizes that this is not the case. Rabid sophistry abounds in the colleges today. Political correctness dominates. Most scholars openly teach world government as the ideal, but they do it in sophistical form in unison with fellow colleagues. The fact that their sophistry is not consciously promoted does not make it any less deceptive. The youth under their influence are still corrupted. Thus theirs is a tacit conspiracy, rather than formally planned. What is crucial to grasp from all this is that nefarious elites are indeed working to destroy a free, sovereign America, and the two main powers moving them towards such tyranny are fiat money and false ideology. Our politicians, corporate moguls and mega bankers are driven toward world government because they lust relentlessly for wealth and power, but also because they have been taught that world government is the ideal for modern times. This agenda of world collectivism didn't just spring full-blown in their heads. It was hatched in the school system. Our political financial elites are first prepared by collectivist ideology in their formative years by their teachers and professors. Without this ideological preparation, there would be no pervasive political movement toward a new world order. There was no widespread enthusiasm for world government in America during the 19th century because collectivism was not taught in the schools. Our scholars taught their students philosophical individualism and the legitimacy of national sovereignty. The powerful banking interests such as the Rothschilds have always been pushing the envelope to acquire more wealth and power. Griffin's wonderful book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, shows this. The Rothschilds were manipulating politics 200 years ago in order to gain more than they had a right to gain via free enterprise. But they were only after more wealth and power in their specific societies, as most bankers throughout history have been. They were not after a one-world dictatorship. This is because national sovereignty was still part of the prevailing ideology taught in everyone's formative years. Once the views of Marx had gained sway by the turn of the 19th century, however, this all changed. After 1900, the ideology of the schools was dramatically altered. World collectivism became the ideal for which to strive. The best and brightest, who went into banking and politics, now wanted more than just wealth and power in their respective societies. They wanted the ability to govern the world. And the collectivist ideology being taught by the scholars gave them the zealotry and belief that such conquest was vitally necessary. Who controls whom? Therefore, in my opinion, it is a mistake to view the financial, banking conspirators as primary in this drama. Those who hold this view admit that intellectuals teach false ideals in the schools, poisoning the minds of the best and brightest coming through the system, but in their eyes, our intellectuals long ago were bought off by the powerful corporate and banking elites of the latter 19th and early 20th centuries. Men such as John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Mellon, and Henry Ford established prestigious foundations with billions of dollars to go toward grants to scholars who would teach the collectivist ethos. In this manner, the financial elites control and manipulate the intellectual elites into becoming their lackeys. They mold our scholars into salesmen for world collectivism. Thus the primary source of the evil taking over the world is the mega bankers and corporate moguls whose reach stretches even into the hallowed halls of the academic arena. This reasoning doesn't fly. Anyone who has a working knowledge of scholars knows that the big creative minds among them are moved by an all-consuming desire for truth and the ideal. They would no more allow men like Rockefeller and Mellon to dictate that truth than they would allow witch doctors to perform surgery on them. The second-line scholars, the popularizers, take their cue from the top scholars and mold their thinking accordingly. Thus it is this leadership of the top scholars that indoctrinates the second-line scholars, who then indoctrinate the best and brightest students with the one-world ideal of collectivism. From where do the top scholars get their motivation? From the superminds of history, the great philosophers, scientists, and economists. And superminds like Isaac Newton, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Adam Smith, Karl Marx, Auguste Comte, Ludwig von Mises, Albert Einstein and John Maynard Keynes do not bow and scrape before mega bankers and corporate moguls. They revere the ideal of truth and seek it at all costs. They may grossly err in their discovery of it and plunge the world into terribly destructive fallacies, witness Marx and Keynes, but their motivation is cerebral rather than monetary. Thus financial elites do not mold the intellectuals mold the financial elites. The major foundations that the elites establish position themselves to be in line with the paradigms formed by the creators and superminds. Second-tier scholars, of course, will often fashion their studies in ways to avoid biting the foundation's hands that feed them, but these intellectuals are not the creators, nor the superminds. They are the popularizers, they do not create new paradigms and visions. It is the big-picture thinkers who do that, and they are not for sale. Refusal to accept this relationship between intellectual elites and financial elites stultifies our cause. Everyone caught up in the fight for freedom directs his efforts to the areas in which he feels most comfortable. Some will fight the ideas that are poisoning the minds of our youth, and some will fight the bankers who are corrupting the money and politics of our system. But it is crucial to understand the cause and effect process that determines what is really happening. We cannot reach our fellow citizens with the truth if we refuse to accept the primacy of ideas. We don't all have to become experts in history, philosophy and economics to engage in this fight, but we do have to understand that ideological matters come first and learn as much as we can from the scholars of freedom in these fields. Failure to do this concedes the battle to the collectivist enemy who grasps such primacy very well and does not shirk from utilizing it. The motive power behind history is the force moving all of us, the ideas that are laid down in our minds during the all-important formative years of our youth. Tyranny cannot be brought about by political and monetary elites alone, it can only be brought about by first corrupting the minds and souls of the citizens when they are young. The intellectuals paved the way for the Hitlers and the Lenins. The intrigues of politics and the conspiracies of elite bankers play a very important role in the torrent of history, but the grand directive of all their action is ideology and the guiding ideals that it promotes. When this ideology is false, it leads to tyranny. When it is true, it leads to the Founding Fathers and America's original concept of freedom. As the novelist Huxley profoundly put it, it is in the light of our beliefs about the ultimate nature of reality that we formulate our conceptions of right and wrong, and it is in the light of our conceptions of right and wrong that we frame our conduct, not only in the relations of private life, but also in the sphere of politics and economics. So far from being irrelevant, our metaphysical beliefs are the finally determining factor in all our actions. End of America as a sovereign nation. To sum all this up, there are two conspiracies at work destroying the freedom of the West, ideological and financial. Our drift into collectivist tyranny starts with the big thinkers of civilization such as Rousseau, Hegel, Comte, Marx, Keynes, etc. They create the tyrannical ethos, which then works its way through the academic arena to capture all levels of scholars, where it proceeds to poison each generation's best and brightest, who then go out and become society's new power elites of mega bankers, bureaucrats, and corporate moguls. The goal of these intellectuals, and the power elites they spawn, is the cessation of America as a sovereign nation. The end of free enterprise and the founders' constitutional system of liberty must naturally follow in order to complete their vision. We have been overrun by alien mind conspirators who are turning America into a nation of sheep. Their nefarious ideas have, over the past 100 years, saturated all our important institutions, from government, to the schools, to the churches, to Hollywood, to the media. These mind conspirators preach soothing words about the need for stability, security and equality, but it is the same goal of all tyrannical collectivisms throughout history, the enslavement of man justified by irrational ideology and sophistry. The only difference is that it is much bigger in ambition today. Its goal is world domination instead of just societal control. My book, The Conservative Revolution, delves into this ideological stream of collectivism that is corrupting America and puts forth a revolutionary plan for a third political party that will stop the carnage and restore sanity to our country. A gargantuan crash of prosperity and freedom now looms up ahead as a result of our financial and intellectual corruption. Out of the crash will come a new society. Our only hope for that new society lies in whether we, who have kept the faith of our fathers, can inform enough of our fellow citizens as to what the requisites of freedom truly are. If we can, then a rebirth of America will take place out of the crash. If not, then some variant of Orwell's nightmare will descend upon the world to enslave and stultify life for the upcoming centuries.